Hi, welcome to Resin Chem Tech. Today I'm going to talk about the differences between smart plugs, smart switches, and smart relays, and when you might consider using one of these devices over another in your home automation system. So hang around. So, whether you're relatively new to the smart home automation market or you've been around for a while, odds are somewhere in your home you've probably used a smart plug or two. Before I talk about all these devices though, there are a couple of things that I do want to cover. First and foremost, regardless of whether you're going to use a switch, a relay, or a plug, you need to verify that the current rating or the amp rating on the device that you're using is going to support all the devices you're going to connect to it. So for example, this particular smart plug, which is an E-Tech City, runs VE Sync, is only rated for a maximum current of 6 amps. So you're probably not going to want to plug something like a space heater into this particular smart plug because it's liable to draw more amps than the plug will support. On the flip side, here is a smart plug. It's a Sonoff S31. This supports up to 15 amps. So just assure that whatever you're buying will support the amps of whatever you're going to connect to it. The next thing is, again, whether it's a plug, a switch, or a relay, you want to assure that it can be integrated into your home automation platform. Here, once again, we're going to be talking about Home Assistant. Now, Home Assistant has integrations for a lot of different devices. I'm going to leave a link down in the video description to the official Home Assistant integration page where you can see all the different types of devices that can be integrated. In addition, the Home Assistant Community Store, which I'll leave a link to, also has additional integrations that can be used. The other option, other than using a native integration, is to be able to flash your own custom firmware. I'll talk about the native versus flashing custom firmware a little bit later in this video. So let's start with talking about the smart plug. As I mentioned, they come in different shapes and sizes. They often have different features. In some cases, it may have power monitoring. Most of them will basically have scheduling in their software where you can set a timer for on-off schedules. Most of the main brands anymore can be integrated with your Google or Amazon speaker assistants. But again, that doesn't allow you to do automation. So you do need to make sure that whatever you select can either be integrated into your, in this case, Home Assistant, or has the ability to flash custom firmware. But let's take a look at a use case scenario. Okay, so let's start with talking about smart plug. In this particular example, I've got just a simple lamp plugged into a standard outlet. And what we want to do is we want to try to find a way to make that simple lamp smart and get it so we can use it in automations within Home Assistant. So what I'm using here is a simple smart plug. This happens to be a BN link. And in this particular case, yes, I do have this flashed with custom Tasmota firmware. But once again, if the smart plug you're using has a native integration into Home Assistant, you wouldn't have to do that flashing of custom firmware. So the nice thing about smart plugs is you don't have to do any wiring. All we've got to do is simply unplug the device we want to control. We will plug in our smart plug, and we will give it a minute or two to boot up. Obviously, the first time that you do this, you're going to have to get this onto your Wi-Fi, and that's either through the instructions that come with the plug if you're using the standard firmware, or the in Tasmota if you happen to have custom firmware. So now we'll simply plug our lamp back in, and almost all of these plugs come with a manual button. So you can see we do have the ability to click to turn the light off and turn it back on. That's not going to be very convenient for us if we have this behind a couch or something like that. You're not going to be able to get to this button. So the big point is the ability to actually put that into Home Assistant. And if you take a look here, I've already got this BN Link plug integrated into Home Assistant. And I've just got a big simple button here, but you can easily see that I can go over here and I can click this button and turn the lamp on and turn the lamp off. Now, more importantly, once we have it in there, we can now use this lamp for automations. We can have the lamp turn on based on motion. We can have it automatically turn off when we know everybody has left the house and the lamp was left on. We can have it turn on, turn off with sunrise, sunset. Basically, we now have the ability to take this simple lamp and use it in Home Assistant and our home automations. So now let's consider this scenario. Same thing, we've got a simple lamp. We have that lamp controlled by our smart plug, but this outlet is now controlled by a wall switch. So again, we can turn the lamp off, we can turn the lamp on, we can control it through Home Assistant, everything is fine. But what happens when someone comes along and they flip the wall switch? Well, the lamp went out, that's good, but so did the power to our smart switch. We now no longer have the ability to control this smart plug either through the button or via Home Assistant. So, what possible remedies could we have here? Well, here's one idea. You simply tape off the switch. I beg you, please don't do this. The one thing you want to always do with your smart home automations is you want to add to or enhance existing functionality. Don't take away basic functionality that already exists. What you've done here is you've taken away the ability to control the light through a simple flip of a switch. This is probably going to frustrate others in your household and not make them fans of your smart home automation. So please don't do this. This is a situation where you might want to consider a smart switch. So here are a few different smart switches. They come in a lot of different shapes, sizes, and flavors. This first one I believe is a GoSun, and it's just a simple toggle on-off single pole switch. These next three are dimmers. So this might be a situation where you can add new functionality and add dimming to a light where you never had it before. Now obviously you're not going to use dimming on things other than lights. You're not going to use dimming on a toaster or a coffee pot or a space heater or anything like that. And you also need to assure that the lights that you're going to connect to this support dimming. Not all LED lights play nice with dimmers, but it would be an option to add dimming where you never had it before. I believe this one, which has a toggle up and down for the brightness control, is a Martin Jerry. This next one actually is a touch slider that controls your dimming, and I believe this is a Tekken. And here's another Martin Jerry brand where you control the dimming with actual buttons, and it actually comes with its own removable faceplate as well. Now, obviously, these smart switches are going to require some wiring. Now, if you're uncomfortable working with household current, household voltage, please consider hiring someone qualified to do so. But if you've ever replaced a single pole light switch before, this is just as easy. You just need to be really careful and understand what you're doing to work on it. And I'm going to give you a brief overview of how you connect one of these switches next. Okay, so once again, before beginning, I want to stress that if you're not comfortable working on around electricity like this, please consider hiring someone who's qualified to do so. We are working with household voltage here, and it can injure or even kill. So I do want to stress, be extremely careful with what you're doing. Always assure that you've got the power shut off. If your home was built in the US anytime after the early 80s or so, and everything's up to code, when you pull out a light switch out of here, what you should find, by the way, I just want to say, I'm working with, this isn't actually connected to anything, so I'm not have to worry about getting shocked here. I just put this thing together so I can show you how it's normally done. We pull this switch out of here, what you should see is you should see black wires connected to the two terminals of your switch. Also in here, you should find two white or your neutral wires connected together. Now, almost all smart switches, smart relays today are going to require a neutral in the box. There are a few exceptions. Lutron makes a smart switch that doesn't require a neutral, but almost every case you're going to have a neutral in the box. If you don't have this white neutral, then odds are you're not going to be able to get a smart switch to work. But the one thing we need to determine is one of these black wires is going to be the hot wire coming in, and the other black wire is going to be going out to our actual lights or our load. We need to determine which of these are which. So, got the power shut off. I'm going to carefully expose these neutral wires. Now what we need to do is we need to go back and very carefully temporarily turn the power back on. That's the only way we're going to be able to determine which of these is hot and which is load, and we're going to need to know that for our smart switch. So once we have the power come back on, very carefully, There's a couple things you can use. You can use one of these voltage detectors, and you simply touch this with the switch in the off position. Touch this to the two terminals. One terminal should have voltage, the other one should not. The other option, if you don't have one of these, is you can simply use a multimeter, set it to the appropriate range for 120 volts AC, and take your two probes on here, and you're going to touch one to your neutral, and again test these two terminals and find out which one has 120 volts. One should have 120 and one should be off. Once you identify the one that has voltage when the switch is off, label that wire with some red electrical tape or something. Make sure you note which one of these is which, then go back and shut your power off. Now once your power is shut off, again come back, verify that you do not have voltage on either one of these, either with your voltage detector or with your multimeter. Verify that the power is off before we touch anything else with a screwdriver. So once I identified my hot wire, I simply remove the two black wires from one side of the switch, the bare copper ground wire from the other side of the switch, and I straighten these out a little bit with a pair of pliers. Now if you take a look at your smart switch, they're almost all be identical. You're going to see four wires labeled live, that's going to be your hot wire, load, that's going to be the other black wire, neutral, and ground. All we've got to do is connect these four wires to the four wires that are here in our box. Again, you can use these wire nuts if you like. Personally, I prefer to use what are called Wago or lever clips. They're simple devices like this. You simply slide your wire in, they clamp down. I just feel like I always make sure I've got a better secure connection using these, but that is again totally optional. So we're just going to connect these up, and once we do that, we'll be right back. Okay, you can see now I've got my hot wire or live wire connected to the live. I've got my load connected to the brown load wire. My neutral, white, is connected to my neutral, and my ground's connected to ground. Now, what comes next is probably going to be the most challenging part of the installation, and that's cramming this all back into this box. You'll notice all these smart switches have a pretty big block here on the back, and oftentimes it can be a real challenge to try to get everything in here and get this back in here flush. We're going to cram this in here, and of course I'm fortunate enough that, again, I can kind of pull these wires out of here. But in some situations, it again can be a real challenge to try to get everything to fit back inside this box, and it takes a little finagling at times. This is one of the advantages we're going to talk about a little bit when it comes to using the relays. We'll get that back in there, and then we can screw this down, and basically our installation is complete and we'd be ready to turn the power back on. But to show you a demo of this, obviously since this is not connected to anything, I can't show you here. I'm actually going to take you to where I have a couple of these actually installed in my house. So here we are in one of our bedrooms, and what you're looking at there is a lamp that's located across the room from the doorway where there is a wall switch. And again, this is very similar to the example I gave where I didn't want to use a smart plug because then you lose the ability to control the lamp and switch it on and off when you walk in the door. So in this case, I actually used one of those Go Sun standard switches. Again, just a simple click, turns the light on, click, turns the light off, just like a normal switch would. Again, you also have the ability to control this by voice. Turn on the bedroom 2 lamp. Turn off the bedroom 2 lamp. And again, once again, this is available in Home Assistant now, so it's available to use for automations, any other kind of control within Home Assistant. And again, just a simple replacement of the standard switch with a Go Sun smart switch. And here's a situation where I used a smart switch to add dimming where dimming wasn't available before. So this switch actually controls the overhead kitchen lights. And also now I have the ability to actually dim those lights that wasn't there before. So again, this is a Martin Jerry dimmer, and not only added the ability to now be able to control the kitchen lights by voice or via Home Assistant, but added dimming to those lights where dimming wasn't available before. Now, one last thing about these smart switches is they almost all come in what's called Decora style, which means if you're replacing a standard single pole switch, you're probably also going to have to replace your faceplate. Now, the faceplates come in numerous formats as well. This is obviously a single gang, but you can also get them in a double gang where it might go beside another standard single pole switch, or even in some cases something like triple gang where you've got two other switches involved. This is similar to what I had set up in the bedroom. But what happens if you have something that looks like this? And what happens if the switch you want to replace happens to be one of the inner switches like this one, and this is the one that you want to make smart? It could be difficult to find a faceplate. Not impossible, but you may have to find something to special order. The other situation may be maybe just you or your significant other just don't like the looks of the Decora style or the clicky paddle, and you would prefer to keep your standard light switch. That's where the smart relay comes into play. So this particular smart relay is called the Shelly 1 PM. I'll get it up here so you can see it a little bit closer. You'll notice that this one's actually rated for up to 16 amps. And the nice thing about this as well, they make it very easy to flash custom firmware if that's what you want. You simply pull this little cover off and you can plug your DuPont jumpers right into pin headers inside of here. And you can plug in those pin headers, connect it to your TTL USB adapter, and flash custom firmware onto this. But honestly, custom firmware really isn't needed anymore because Shelly has begun to include MQTT natively in their devices. So you can integrate this right into Home Assistant. Now I will say again, now you're going to step up and make it a little bit more difficult in terms of the wiring. I'm not going to go into complete wiring here, but to give you an idea, this is what the wiring diagram looks like for this particular Shelly 1. Once again, you're still going to have to identify which is your hot and which is your load wire on your switch before you take the switch out. But you notice there are going to be a number of jumpers that you're going to run off of here. You're going to run an L1 and L over to your hot and to your switch. So it's a little bit more wiring. There's lots of information on the Shelly website and plenty of YouTube videos on how to wire these up, so I'm not going to take time here to do it. But I will show you a couple of places where I've opted to use this smart relay behind a light switch as opposed to using an actual smart switch itself. So here's a situation where using a smart relay over a smart switch was advantageous. This is the master bedroom, and you see in this case we actually have 3 gangs or 3 switches here. Now the switch actually controls the lamp all the way across the room. And of course, just like a normal switch would work, we can turn that on, light comes on, flip it off, light goes off. Now, since it's a smart switch and it's integrated into Home Assistant, we also have the ability to control it by voice. Turn on the master bedroom lamp.
All right, turning the master bedroom lamp on.
Turn off the master bedroom lamp. So in this case, we've managed to keep our standard switch. This actually is still the original switch that was installed in here. But by putting a relay, smart relay, a Shelly 1 behind the switch, we now have made the lamp smart, able to control it by voice from once you get into bed, and also able to use it in automations in Home Assistant. And I also wanted to mention that it is possible to sometimes use these devices in combination. An example where you might want to do that is a situation where you have 3-way or even 4-way switching. So for example, when you saw this switch in my kitchen is actually controlled by 4-way lighting. There are 2 other switches that control the kitchen lights. Now if I'd left those normal switches in play, I would have had the same problem that you have with the smart plug. If someone would have turned off one of those other normal switches, it would have killed the power to my dimmer and taken it offline. So what I did was I took a Shelly relay and put one behind each of the other 2 switches. And then using Tasmota, in this case it does require custom firmware, but Tasmota has the ability to keep all of these devices in sync with each other. So if someone were to turn the switch on over here, it's going to send a signal over here to also tell this to turn the lights on, because these 2 switches are now no longer connected to the load, just this one. but the switches function just like normal. So it doesn't matter if someone turns on this switch, someone turns on this switch, or someone turns on this switch, the kitchen lights are going to come on, and the same way with turning the switch off. Meanwhile, this always stays available for dimming. If you're interested in that, leave me something down in the comments, and I'll consider doing a video on how I did the 4-way wiring and lighting for my kitchen lights. So before we wrap this up, let's take a quick look at Home Assistant and where I used these various different devices and why I decided to use them. You saw the master bedroom. That uses a Shelly Smart Relay behind a standard single pole switch. The driveway actually was originally controlled by a photo sensor that was built into the side of the house that was supposed to cause the lights to come on and off at sunrise, sunset, but there was no local control over those lights whatsoever. So I replaced that, put a Shelly Smart Relay behind the photo sensor, disconnected the photo sensor, can still have the lights come on at sunrise, sunset, but I now also have the ability to control those lights. The family room, the lamp in there is actually not connected to a switched outlet, so I just use a standard smart plug for that. The kitchen sink uses a Shelly Smart Relay behind a standard switch. The garage uses a Shelly Smart Relay behind a standard switch. And then again, you saw the kitchen that has a dimmer and 2 Shelly Smart Relays in a 4-way switch configuration. And the basement actually uses 2 Martin Jerry dimmers in a 3-way switch configuration. And you'll notice that since these are dimmers, I obviously have the ability to also control the brightness of those lights. I have presets here, but you can go to any percentage whatsoever. So obviously I've mixed and matched depending on my particular scenario and the switches involved and how I wanted to control them. So I did want to talk briefly here about the idea of custom firmware versus stock firmware. So you might be asking, why would you want to put custom firmware on any of these devices? Well, first of all, the stock firmware comes with the manufacturer's app and generally always requires you to create a cloud account and give up your email address and maybe additional information. Another drawback there is you lose your automations if your access to the internet goes out. If, like me and with Comcast, it's not unusual for the internet to go out. If that happens, I now lose the ability to control these devices or have automations. May not be a big deal, but in the case of my family room lamp, my smart plug is behind a couch. If I lose internet and that was a cloud-based device, my only way to turn that lamp on would be to crawl behind the couch, find the physical switch, and flip it on. So the other drawback is the manufacturer might start charging for use of their cloud services where it was free before. There's a long history of companies that have done this. Hint, hint, wink. And another option is they might just go out of business and close up shop and take down their servers, in which case your device now becomes useless. So those are some good reasons why you might want to put custom firmware on here. When you do that, all of your data is going to stay local. You don't have to give up your email address or any other information to any third party. All your automations are still going to work if the internet goes out because everything's going to run locally on your local Wi-Fi. Now, you can still control these devices via your phone if you like through the Home Assistant mobile app, assuming Home Assistant is your automation platform. And if you really want to be able to control your devices remotely when you're away from home, you can still do that through Home Assistant if you have a subscription to Navicasa. So those are some of the reasons why you might want to consider custom firmware. However, it's becoming harder and harder to find devices that you can flash custom firmware onto. I'd say maybe only a year or so ago, nearly every smart home device all used the common ESP8266 chip, and that can easily be flashed. Now sometimes you had to take devices apart. That could be easy or hard, and in some cases like 2U devices, you could actually flash custom firmware over the air with no soldering, without taking the devices apart, with just a Raspberry Pi and a D1 Mini. Sadly, those days are behind us, and it's becoming harder and harder to find devices that you can flash custom firmware. I'm going to leave a link down in the video description to a site that lists Tasmota devices that are still known to work. But again, they're changing so rapidly, even if a device works one day, it might not work with the next batch that comes in. So luckily, when I saw this time coming, I stocked up on a whole bunch of plugs, switches, and relays that I knew were flashable. So I will mention there are a few exceptions here. I showed this in my smart laundry or my washing machine notifications video. The Sonoff S31 is easily flashable. This whole thing comes apart with just a snap-off cover and 3 screws, and they actually label the pads on here to make this thing flashable. And you keep hearing me talk about Tasmota. That's probably the most common custom firmware. But if you can flash these devices, you can flash it with Tasmota, ESPHome, or if you're really venturesome, you can use Arduino and write your own code to flash to the ESP8266. As far as relays, the Shelly line of relays, and I showed this before, actually include pin headers for you, where you can flash custom firmware like Tasmota or ESPHome. But this is becoming really not needed with these because Shelly has built MQTT right into the devices themselves. So there's also a company called Athom, I'll leave a link down in the video description as well, who sell smart plugs and smart switches already pre-flashed with Tasmota. So that would be an option for you to have custom firmware where you don't have to flash it yourself. You can actually buy it already flashed with custom firmware. So that's just a little bit of thought about stock versus custom firmware. So that's going to do it for this video. Hopefully I've given you some thoughts about uses of smart plugs, smart switches, and smart relays. Now, obviously smart plugs and smart relays can be used for a lot of things other than lighting, which is pretty much what we've talked about here. But in a lot of cases, the same rules and the same thoughts apply. So give it some thought the next time you're going to start a smart home project about which device and device type might make the most sense for you. And if you found anything in this video that you liked or found it helpful, please hit that like button down below. That lets both me and YouTube know that you like this video and you'd like to see more videos like it. If you want to see more of my videos, click that subscribe button and ding the little bell icon if you want to be notified when I release new videos. As always, thanks for watching. Hope to see you soon.